Last time then we introduced this idea of full stack development. So we had a backend server written in C#.NET connecting to an SQLite database and presenting an API which then our front end written in Angular could get hold of the data from and display it and manipulate it in whatever way we chose. And so we can see all that working. There we've got the actual Angular app. So we've got our list of all the individual ratings, so each book can have multiple ratings, and then we've got the summary that just takes the average of the ratings for each book. We also had this ability to add a review, so I could give Dr. No yet another review, and we see that listed in there. And then that's all working through the back end, so we can just see that here with the in-process server. So that's just showing us that that's running. No need to look at the details of that. So it's all working in its very basic way, but there was a fundamental problem that I completely hid away and didn't mention, which is the fact that although the actual application's working, the unit tests are now going to be failing completely. So if I just bring up VS Code, you can see there we've got the application running, no problems. But if I go to a different window and just type in ng test to do the unit testing, then we can see we're getting 4 failures. And if we just bring in the browser, we can see that the basic thing it's objecting to is that it cannot inject this HTTP client. So that's happening again and again and again, that HTTP client is missing. And that's really exactly the sort of thing you'd expect, because remember what we did last time in introducing this idea. We had our book review repository service, and that requires to be injected this thing called HTTP client. And that we configured for the actual running system, but we didn't configure that for the test system. And so not only does the book review repository service test fail, because when it tries to create the object, it's not got the thing that we need to inject, but anything that depends on that also fails. So for example, the all review component spec.ts, because that depends in its constructor on the book review repository service, and the book review repository service depends on, as we just saw, HTTP client. That's why everything starts to break down. And the only one that's not going to have a problem is going to actually be our book review summary service, because although that does require the book review repository service to be injected, actually if we look at the tests, that's the one where we were mocking the book review repository service. So that's where we create the mock. And of course the mock doesn't depend on HTTP client, so this bit works okay. So what we need to do is mock the HTTP client. One thing you'll also notice, actually, we don't really need to do very much with it yet, because all of these tests that are failing are really simply failing on their first auto-generated test it should create. So we're not really testing that they're interacting with the HTTP client correctly, but in order to get them just to be created, we've got to have this mock idea. But thankfully, we don't have to do really very much work for ourselves, unlike when we were mocking one of our own classes. So as we saw here, where we had the summary service tests, we had to use this Jasmine create spy object and do all of that work that we looked at in the earlier video. Because HTTP client is so widely used, that is actually predefined for us. So all we've got to do is include this predefined idea. So we'll go into each of these, and all we need to do is, in the imports on the test, we need to add an additional import. So in addition to whatever else is there, I've got to put in this HTTP client testing module. Once again, like we saw with HTTP client itself, for some reason, Visual Studio Code is not good at importing this for you. So what we'll have to do is just say import, and then the name of the item, and then from, and then it's at angular/common/http/testing. And so now you can see that's all happy. And really, for that one test, that's all we've got to do. So you can see down the bottom, we've got 4 tests failing at the moment. If I just save that, it'll build and run the tests again, and that's gone down to 3. So that much has worked in the one place we put it. So let's now put it in the other ones. So we'll just grab that, and then we'll go to the next one, which is the all review component spec, and hasn't got any imports at the moment. So we'll just pop that in. We don't need the forms module here. And we should see, once you've managed to get Visual Studio to understand where it is once, then actually it starts doing things automatically. So that's the one we want to put into there. Then also we'll need this in the summary component. And again, get hold of the import. And then lastly, in the repository service tests themselves, that's where we've got to put that in. We haven't got anything at all in there, but in there's where it goes. Get hold of it. And now if we save all of those, and we can see that's all working because we've now configured it so that it injects that HTTP client testing module into any situation where an HTTP client is required, and so we're effectively mocking it. So that's got the code working to the extent that we pass the tests, but we still haven't got any really sensible tests. So let's actually do that. And I won't do all of them. You should be thorough when you're doing testing in a professional application, but here we'll just do a couple of examples. And so the first one we'll do, let's do it on the all review component. So at the moment, again, we've just got that it should create just to basically make sure we can create the component, but we want to make sure that this now correctly gets hold of the list of all of the books. And once again, we want to do that with mock data, and we've already done a bit of this, so we can steal the mock data from somewhere else. So if we go into the summary service spec, here, remember, we had already created some mock data. So let's grab that and then put that same mock data into our all reviews test code. So pop that in at the top there. Get hold of the book review import. And then what I'm going to do is add another test. So typically easiest just to copy and paste these. And it should get the correct reviews. Okay, so the component should have that. And then remember, these are stored on the component. So what I can do is say expect, and then I'm going to say component dot reviews. So that's our list of reviews that will eventually come through from the mock HTTP. And the first thing I'm going to do is just a to have size and then 3. So that's a nice easy way just to check that we can see we've got the 3 mock reviews here, so that'll test for that. And then let's do individual tests. So we're going to say expect component dot reviews 0, and then we'll say to equal, and then basically it's just got to equal what we had there. So let's just steal that. Book 1, rating 5, pop that in there, tidy it up a little because it doesn't really need to be on multiple lines. And that's that one. And then we're going to be thorough, so we'll test all 3 of those. So 0 and 1 and 2. And again, if you look up here, the second one was book 1 with a rating of 1. Third one was book 2 with a rating of 4. So that looks like it should be our test. But if we save that one and run it, then again, we're getting a failure. If we look at the browser, we can see it's got an empty array. It's expecting it to have size 3. So 3 was what we wanted, but we're not getting anything. And that's simply because we haven't actually hooked this up to get those mock reviews in through the mock HTTP client. So that's where we need to do a little bit more work. So what we've got to do now is here, we're going to say let, and then we'll call this HTTP testing controller. You can call it what you like, but that's the normal name because that basically is the type that it is. So HTTP testing controller there, which we should be able to do an import of. So that's coming in from the same place. So this gives us the ability to configure and set up our mock HTTP client. Having declared it, we then need to create it. And so we do that just here after we've generated the component. So we're going to say that equals, and then we can say testbed dot inject, and then we just have to give it the type, which remember was that same thing again, but with a capital H because it's a type. And so that has given us this object that we can now configure. And then the last thing we have to do is we have to tell it to expect a GET request to the URL and then tell it what to do when it gets that GET request. So remember, if we look at the actual repository, we can see that in the constructor calls load reviews, and that is where we make our request back to the server, or back to the server if we've got this configured for the real application, to our mock HTTP client if not. And what we need to do is check that it's gone to the right URL, that it's a get operation rather than a post. We'll look at the post later on. And then when it does that, we've got to make sure that we just give back, as a result, that mock data that we were just looking at. So let's do that. So what we do at the beginning of this test, before we actually do all of that checking, we're going to say const request equals, and then on our HTTP testing controller, we're going to say expect 1. So we're going to say you should get a single call, and then we have to specify the precise rules of what this request is going to be. So let's just do this with an arrow function. So I'll just call this data. But then what we can do with that is we can see the various bits of data we can check. So if I say data.url, that's going to be the URL that we're expecting should be passed in. And we can obviously just steal that from here. So if I just grab hold of that, bear in mind, as I mentioned last time, not really a good idea to have that hard coded because localhost 5001 is only during development, but we'll look at that later, how we can get configuration data in there. But we're going to check that the URL is what we expect it to be, and we're going to check that the method is get, because remember that's what we said we wanted. So that will verify that that request comes through only once, matches that, and if everything's matched, that gives a green light, otherwise a red light. The other thing we've got to do, remember, is we've now got to return the mock data. So I now say request.flush, and this is what will actually kick off the whole process. So before that, the request won't actually be processed until you do the flush, and then we can pass in there the data that we want to send back, which was our mock reviews, remember, that we already pasted in from elsewhere. So doing all of that means that when we do the flush, it will send the data back. That all happens in the constructor, which is actually really happening in the before each, but it doesn't matter. Once we've done the flush, then the data will be correct, and then all that should be filled in. So all we have to do now, save that, and we can see we've got 8 successes. And if we just look at the browser, remember it's should get the correct reviews, and we should be able to see we've got there should get the correct reviews. So that's worked correctly with the mock data. If we got anything wrong about that, so if, for example, I were to change the code here so it makes an incorrect request, so let's just put an S on the end of that and save it, we'll see we get a failure, and the failure is expected 1 matching request for criteria, and then it just matched by function, but we know it was in the function, and we can see it's not matching. So we can be very precise and get that to fail if there was really anything going wrong with all of that. Let's just quickly do one more, because that was looking at the get when we try and make sure the data comes back. The other example we had was for our post. So remember in our add review component, when we click add review, that calls add review on the repository. That then now does a post method to the book review for all of that to work. And so that's what we'll need to do in the add review component spec. Similar sort of thing. So in fact, let's copy load that. So if we get hold of our all review spec, get hold of that and put that into our add review component in the same sort of place. That will mean we need to get hold of that. Then also we need to get hold of the actual object for that. So remember that was that bit of code there in our before each. So in our before each, we'll put that one in there. And then we need to actually write our test. So again, let's copy that one and do a post when review is added. So let's then set up the basic functionality. So in order to add a review, remember the way this works, we need to say component.title. So this, if we just look at the code here, is our add review. We've just got these 2 fields, title and rating. So that's what we're setting up in a test rather than typing them into the GUI. So we've got those. So we're going to say component.title equals, and let's make that one, well, it doesn't matter at all, book A, and then component dot rating equals, give that a 4. And then we're going to say component dot add review, and the way that works, add review takes no parameters, and if we just look inside that, you can see it picks up the title and the rating that I've just set up and then sends it off to the add review in the repository service. So very similar to what you do in manual testing. You fill in one of the fields, you fill in the other field, you press the button, basically in code the same sort of thing that's happening there. But of course, notice we haven't even checked for anything. We've got no expect statement, so it's not as yet a particularly good test. And in fact, in terms of the behavior, all that behavior is really hidden away. All we can do to test it is make sure that the correct calls are made on the HTTP client. And again, we do that in a not dissimilar way. So what I've now got to do is, after I've done all that, I'm going to once again say const request equals HTTP testing controller. And again, we want only one of these calls to be made. Data, and then the arrow function. And then we now want to make sure that one's correct. Well, the URL is going to be exactly the same because it's still going back to the same URL on the server, because remember, this is a RESTful API, and therefore we have the same URL but a different method when we want to do the different things. So if I just copy that and pop that in there, so we want to make sure that that's correct. But then what we also want to do is make sure that this one is a post. So and data dot method equals post. So that's check the request. What we can then do is we can then do an expect, and then we say request, and then slightly confuse me, we say request dot body. And so what I want to do is make sure that the body of this is correct. It's sending off the correct data. So I'm going to do a dot to equal, and then what it should be sending off is obviously a book review for book A with a rating of 4. So we can put in title of book A and rating of 4. And then once again, we're going to have to do this request.flush. Remember, that gives us the data that we're returning. Well, on a post request, remember what gets returned is the ID of the newly created object. And we don't really care about that. We know it's a number, so I'll just put 1 in there. We're not going to worry too much. But having done all that, that should now work correctly. So if I save that, then we got an error. Anyone notice what I did? It's because I put 4 as a string in there, not as a number. Try that one again. And you can see we've got our 9 successes. So typical sort of thing you can make as a mistake, easy enough to fix. So that's it. We have now seen how we can complete that process of connecting up the Angular front end to the .NET backend, not only having the application work, but really just importantly, having the unit tests work. And so we saw we needed to mock the HTTP client just to get it working at all, and then we could use that to take precise control of our tests. So hope you enjoyed that. If you did, do click like, do subscribe, and next time we'll be looking at some other aspects of how we communicate between Angular and a backend server.